spent a lot of time with Dad. I was here in Fort Wayne from about 1982. For about 5 years I was out of town, but for the majority of Dad's retired life I was around here. As far as being involvement in the community, I remember when he retired in 1979 that he said, "Joe, I'm busier than I ever was when I worked." He sat on boards and was just very, very interested in the community. He always told us, especially when I was around, he would say, the most important thing is that you're able to contribute to your community and make it a better place, because not everybody has that opportunity. And so that was very much, I believe, how he lived his probably 15 years from when he retired until, you know, later on in life, that when he was able to be active and very motivated, he loved to be part of the community. And you know, Dad was a hard worker, but family was the most important thing to him. I always thought it was amazing that he wanted to be home for dinner every night. And so that was always something that we looked forward to. We knew we could pretty much count on him being there at 5:30 to have dinner with the whole family, and everybody rallied around and knew we had to be at home ready to eat dinner at 5:30 when Dad got home. I don't know that I spent a lot of time with him working. We all worked at DeWald, and that's what I remember. I mean, some of them remember Fort Wayne Builder Supply, but for me, I remembered DeWald Manufacturing. And from the time I was probably 11, I would spend time there on Saturdays. Dad would take me in and we'd work Saturday mornings. And first it would just be putting screws in the hinges. We would put those in. It was a pre-hung door company. And then eventually you got to use more and more of the equipment. But I always enjoyed spending time there, and he always went in on Saturday morning. That was the thing that we did together. As far as working goes for the two of us, we love to do projects. My dad loved woodworking. That was, if there was a passion that he had, when he got ready to retire, he went and bought all the pieces of woodworking equipment that he had never had in his life, and was going to fully equip a shop so that he could do all of these woodworking crafts that he wanted. He never got around to doing many of those crafts, but he did do a number of projects that always were trying to help all the boys that wanted to do some of those projects. One of the biggest projects we did together was, and this was later on in his life, we made all of the paneling in our basement for the new house here. Dad and I did. And so they cut down the trees. My brothers and I had all of it lumbered, and then we dried it for a period of time, and then we took that and made all of the paneling and all the woodworking in the basement. And Dad and I, that was when I had kids, young kids, we'd put the kids to bed. It would be about 7 o'clock at night, and Dad and I'd go out till 11 o'clock, like 5 nights a week, and work on this woodworking. It was a far larger task than we had ever expected it was going to be. But he was such a trooper, and I'm trying to think how old he was, but I think he was probably close to, well, he was 83 years old. He was 82 years old. And so at that age, 5 nights a week, we were out there till 11 o'clock working on this project, because we had to have it ready for all of it to be put in the house when it was finished. So those kind of things I remember. I did lots of projects with Dad. Dad didn't have a lot of time on the weekends. He was busy working during the week, but on the weekends, you wouldn't probably go fishing with him, and you wouldn't play games particularly. If you wanted to spend time with Dad, you better get involved in a project he was working on. And he always had a project. He did plumbing, he did woodworking, he repaired things, put ceiling tiles in, electrical work, whatever it was. And I learned an awful lot from him, and I really had a great time in those years. This is when I was a teenager and a young man, learning those things and spending time with my dad. He loved to hunt and fish. We didn't do a lot of hunting together as much, but we did a lot of fishing. one of the things that he loved to do was to plan for those trips and the fishing that we did. So not only did we do it at the lake, but we also had a great time going on fishing trips. We always had an annual fishing trip from really the time how it all got started. It wasn't intended to be a fishing trip at all. I was in college, and some college friends had said, do you want to go on a trip somewhere? I was a big canoeer and an outdoorsman person. I said, we ought to go to the Boundary Waters. Never been there, but that would be a really fun thing to do, and do a canoe trip. And so this gentleman and I were interested in doing it, and then we went on to, there was going to be a couple guys, then there was going to be 4 guys, and then there was going to be some girls that went along too on this trip. And so the next thing you know is we had 8 people that were all going to go on this trip. Well, as it got closer and closer and we were doing all the preparation, one by one, everybody dropped out, and we got to the very end, and I was the only person. And this was a week before I was going to go on the trip, and my dad said, well, why don't I go with you? And so we went on a trip together, canoeing into the Boundary Waters. It was our first ever experience in there, and it was just a great time. Oh my gosh, we swamped the canoe, which Dad and I were excellent canoers, but we were trying to save the bait. We didn't have very much bait, and a little minnow got overboard, and I went to grab for it. He went the other way, I went the other way, and we both ended up in the water. But we had just such a great time there, and we learned a little bit about the fishing, and that started our trip to the Boundary Waters, our annual fishing trip to the Boundary Waters. From there on, various members of the family, the boys, would go on this trip, and we went on, I counted them up the other day, we went on 30 fishing trips from the time that he was probably retired until, you know, he passed away. The Friday night group. This was a group. First, my mom and dad loved to get together with friends and family, but I don't exactly know how it ended up being started, but there were a number of people that went to St. Vincent's that loved to go out to eat, and so they created this Friday night group. As everyone has always said, my mom and dad were very faith-oriented, and so Friday night they would go to Mass, and then after Mass they would all go out for dinner. And each couple rotated on where they would take everybody for dinner. Everybody bought their own dinner, but they all would decide where they were going to go, and everybody took turns in doing that. And so this group started out with, I want to say that the initial number was 25 or 26 people, a big crowd. And so, you know, they'd overwhelm a place when they came in, but they went on and on and on, and over this time of 20 plus years, they got down to, I believe there's only 5 people left. But they just had a great time and enjoyed themselves. And one of the things that I was surprised at over the years, we had talked about where Dad was going to be buried, and he had always wanted to be buried at St. Vincent's. When we made that decision that we would do that, I went in because I didn't really even know where his their placements were within the cemetery. They pulled out this big plat and looked at this, and I immediately looked, and all in this one corner were all the Friday night group. So many of them all have burial sites right there. Now, a lot of them haven't been used, or some of them haven't been used, but they were all there, and I just thought that that was amazing that, you know, they must have all made a decision at one point in time that this is kind of where they all wanted to be buried. Dad, and I always thought this was interesting, he referred to his father as stainless steel. And you had to know Boppy, that was what we called him as grandkids. Boppy was just this amazing man. I don't think he ever said a bad word about anybody. And my dad was cut from the same cloth. He never referred to himself as stainless steel, but he always said about his dad, he was never tarnished, sharp as ever, and just was this amazing man. That was my dad. I think that all of those characteristics and traits were passed down from his father to Dad, and he really was. He was one of these men that he genuinely cared about everything. He had the most open-minded way of looking at things. I was just always amazed at, really, to me, that there were a lot of things that could have easily been something in his life that would have been challenging, but he chose to look at that maybe as they say, that glass is half full. Always had, there was the rose-colored glasses on, never had anything bad to say about anyone. He was just amazing, and he was a diehard patriot. In very subtle ways. He was not a flashy man who wanted to have the limelight. He was very quiet about what he did, but he was very passionate about that. And you know, he was my role model, my mentor, my father, a great community leader. He was all the things that you would love to have as a part of your life, and I was fortunate enough to have him as a father. So that was a blessing that I loved. My other thing, and you see I live next to Mom and Dad. We all grew up very close. We lived a door away from my one grandparents, and we lived 2 blocks away from my other grandparents. And I had a relationship with my grandparents that I just so cherished, and it very much formed who I am today. And I wanted that for my children. And I had a very strong commitment to be within walking distance of my parents so that my kids would be able to grow up next to their grandparents. And I had prayed all my life that because I got married late, but I had prayed all my life that my parents would get to know my children. I never imagined in my wildest dreams that my children would get to know my grandparents. They lived such a long, blessed life. It was just something that, you know, I'd always hoped and believed in, but I was able to actually have that happen, and I'm very grateful for that.